Part 1. The orbital fortress called the Unassailable Crown was the pride of the hegemony. It hung in the darkness of space like a metal moon, bristling with weapons and sensors and shields that could stop almost anything the galaxy could throw at it. For 400 years, no enemy had ever breached its walls. No spy had ever stolen its secrets. No assassin had ever reached its commanders. They believed their fortress was perfect, and for a very long time they were right. High Warden stood on the command deck and watched the stars through the massive viewport. He was tall for it, with deep blue skin and 4 eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. His uniform was covered in medals and ribbons that told the story of a long military career. He had commanded the Unassailable Crown for 30 years, and in all that time nothing had ever gone wrong. Nothing important anyway. Small problems happened, of course. Equipment broke. Crew members made mistakes. But the fortress itself remained secure, unbreakable, untouchable. Tonight was like any other night. The security displays showed green across every sector. The patrol teams reported nothing unusual. The AI that controlled the sensor grid hummed quietly, watching for threats that never came. Allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. Tomorrow he would send his report to the Hegemony Council. All quiet, all perfect, just like always. He did not know that 6 humans were already inside his fortress. Commander pressed her body flat against the inside of a ventilation shaft and held her breath. The shaft was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for a human to squeeze through. Most species in the galaxy could not have fit inside it at all. They had thick bodies and stiff joints. They were too large. They had exoskeletons that could not bend in the right ways. But humans were different. Humans were soft and flexible in ways that other species found disturbing. Waited in the darkness, counting seconds in her head. Somewhere below her, a sensor was sweeping the corridor. She could not see it, but she knew it was there. Her team had spent months studying the Unassailable Crown, learning its patterns, memorizing its routines. They knew exactly when each sensor activated and how long it took to complete its sweep. They knew the blind spots and the gaps. They knew everything. The sensor finished its sweep, began to move again, pulling herself forward with slow, careful movements. Her specialized suit hugged her body like a second skin, redistributing her body heat so that thermal sensors could not detect her. The material was black and non-reflective, swallowing light instead of bouncing it back. In the shadows, she was almost invisible. Behind her, 5 other humans followed in silence. They moved like ghosts, like smoke, like things that existed only in nightmares. Each of them had trained for years to reach this level of skill. They could control their breathing, slow their heartbeats, and hold positions for hours without moving a single muscle. They could read a room in seconds and find every hiding spot, every escape route, every weakness. They had never encountered anything like them. The security system of the Unassailable Crown was designed to detect every known threat in the galaxy. It had thermal sensors for heat-blooded species. It had pheromone detectors for races. It had gravitational monitors for species made of gas or energy. It had motion trackers, sound detectors, and electromagnetic scanners. The designers had studied every species in the Galactic Coalition and built defenses against all of them. But humans were new to the galactic stage. They had only made contact with other species a few decades ago. They knew about them, of course. They had files and reports and threat assessments, but the files were incomplete. The reports were outdated. The threat assessments were based on assumptions that turned out to be wrong. The biggest assumption was that all sapient species moved in predictable ways. They moved in predictable ways. So did and all the others. Their bodies had certain limitations. Their joints bent in certain directions. Their muscles got tired after certain amounts of time. The security AI had learned these patterns over centuries. It knew how fast each species could move, how long they could hold still, and how much space they needed to squeeze through tight spaces. Humans broke all the rules, reached the end of the ventilation shaft and paused at a grated opening. Through the metal bars, she could see a corridor stretching away into the distance. The walls were smooth and white, lit by soft blue lights. A patrol team would pass through in approximately 4 minutes. She pulled a small device from her belt and attached it to the grate. The device was a simple cutting tool, almost silent, designed to slice through metal without making noise or heat. In 30 seconds, the grate was loose. She waited for the patrol to pass. The guards walked by without looking up. They were talking to each other in low voices, discussing something about a meal shift or a recreational activity. Did not understand their language, but she did not need to. Body language was universal. These guards were relaxed, comfortable. They had no idea that anything was wrong. After the guards disappeared around a corner, slipped out of the ventilation shaft and dropped to the floor without making a sound. She pressed herself against the wall and waited for her team. One by one, they emerged from the darkness and joined her. 6 shadows standing in a bright corridor, somehow unseen by the sensors that should have detected them instantly. The AI registered nothing. To its electronic mind, the corridor was empty. They moved through the fortress like water flowing through cracks. They avoided cameras by staying in angles that the lenses could not cover. They passed sensors by moving so slowly that their motion fell below detection thresholds. They hid in shadows that the designers had not realized existed, exploiting blind spots created by the simple assumption that nobody could fit into spaces that small. At one point, a maintenance worker walked within 3 feet of where 2 of the team members were pressed against a wall. The worker was carrying a toolbox and muttering to himself about a broken power coupling. He never looked to his left. He never saw the 2 humans standing completely still, their breathing so quiet that it was inaudible, their bodies so motionless that they might have been statues. The worker walked away. The humans continued. High Warden finished reviewing the security logs and nodded to himself. Another perfect night. He stood up from his command chair and stretched his arms above his head. His shift was ending soon. He would hand over control to his second-in-command and retire to his quarters for rest. Tomorrow, there would be more reports to review, more decisions to make, more responsibilities to carry. But tonight, his work was done. He walked through the command center, acknowledging the salutes of his officers with small nods. The room was large and circular, filled with glowing displays and busy crew members. Everyone was focused on their tasks. Everyone was professional, felt a surge of pride in his people. They were the best the hegemony had to offer. He never saw the shadow detach itself from the ceiling. Commander dropped silently behind the High Warden as he walked toward the exit. She landed on the balls of her feet, absorbing the impact with bent knees, making no sound at all. For a single heartbeat, she was standing directly behind the most important person on the fortress. She could have killed him. She could have taken him hostage. She could have done anything. Instead, she melted back into the darkness as another officer turned to look in her direction. By the time the officer's eyes reached the spot where she had been standing, there was nothing there. Just empty air, just shadows. Walked out of the command center without knowing how close he had come to death. The door closed behind him. The humans continued their mission. The impossible breach had begun. Part 2. The first sign that something was wrong came at shift change. A patrol team was supposed to report to their stations at the start of the night cycle, but 3 of them never arrived. Their supervisor tried to contact them through the communication system. No response. He tried again. Still nothing. After the 3rd attempt, he sent another team to check their quarters. They found all 3 guards unconscious on the floor, arranged neatly in a row with their hands folded on their chests. Their uniforms were untouched. Their weapons were still in their holsters. Their vital signs were stable. They were simply asleep, deep in a dreamless darkness that no amount of shaking could break. The supervisor stared at the sleeping guards and felt something cold crawl up his spine. This was not normal. This was not right. He reached for the emergency alarm. Within minutes, the entire fortress was awake. Second Commander arrived at the scene with 24 security officers behind him. He was a veteran of many battles, who had earned his rank through skill and courage. His four eyes swept across the room, taking in every detail. The sleeping guards, the lack of any signs of struggle, the perfect, almost gentle way they had been laid out on the floor. Someone had done this. Someone had entered the room, neutralized three armed soldiers, and arranged their bodies without triggering any alarms. That should have been impossible. Initiate full lockdown, ordered. Every door, every corridor, every room. Nobody moves without authorization. His officers scattered to carry out his commands. Blast doors began slamming shut throughout the fortress, sealing off sections from each other. The atmospheric controls cycled to maximum illumination, flooding every space with bright white light. Shadows disappeared. Corners that had been dim became visible. The entire fortress transformed into a blazing box of light with nowhere to hide. Watch the security feeds on a portable display. Hundreds of cameras showed him hundreds of corridors, all empty, all silent. The AI reported no intruders detected, no anomalies found. Everything looked normal. But three of his guards were unconscious, and nobody knew why. In a maintenance corridor on the far side of the fortress, Commander pressed herself into a narrow gap between two pipes and held perfectly still. The lights had changed from dim blue to harsh white, eliminating the shadows she had been using for cover. She could hear boots in the distance, patrol teams moving through the corridors with new urgency. Her team was scattered across the fortress now, each member working toward their own objective. They communicated through hand signals when they could see each other, and through silence when they could not. No radios, no electronic devices that could be detected. Just the old ways, the methods that humans had developed over thousands of years of hunting and being hunted on their home world. Earth had been a harsh teacher. Humans had evolved alongside predators that could outrun them, outmuscle them, and outfight them in every way. To survive, they had learned to be clever. They had learned to watch and wait. They had learned to read the land, understand their enemies, and strike at exactly the right moment. Those instincts were written deep in human genetics, passed down through countless generations. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Heard the patrol team approaching. Four guards moving quickly but carelessly. They were scared, she could tell. Scared soldiers made mistakes. They looked where they expected to find threats and missed the unexpected. They checked doors and corners but forgot to look up. They moved too fast to notice the small things. She waited until they passed, then slipped out of her hiding spot and continued toward her objective. On the command deck, received more reports of unconscious guards. 7 now, scattered across 3 different sectors. All of them had been neutralized the same way, put to sleep without visible injuries, laid out neatly on the floor. Medical teams were examining the first victims, but they could not find any explanation. No toxins in their blood. No signs of energy weapon discharge. No trauma of any kind. "How is this happening?" demanded. "The sensors show nothing. The cameras show nothing. How are intruders moving through my fortress unseen?" Nobody had an answer. The AI ran diagnostic after diagnostic, checking its sensors for malfunctions. Everything tested normal. The thermal sensors were working perfectly. The motion detectors were functioning correctly. The entire security grid was operating exactly as designed. According to the AI, there were no intruders on the unassailable crown. But the unconscious guards told a different story. Specialist Cole was the youngest member of his team, but he was already one of the best infiltrators humanity had ever produced. He moved through the fortress like a whisper, finding paths that they had never imagined possible. At one point, he climbed straight up a wall using tiny imperfections in the metal as handholds. At another, he squeezed through a gap between 2 pipes that was barely 8 inches wide. His body bent in ways that would have been impossible for other species. His fingers found grips that were invisible to the naked eye. His breathing was so slow and controlled that even sensitive audio sensors could not pick it up. He was a ghost made flesh, a shadow given form. His objective was the secondary data core in Section 7, the stored backup copies of their most sensitive information there, protected by layers of encryption and biometric locks. Under normal circumstances, breaking in would require expert hackers, specialized equipment, and hours of patient work. Cole had a simpler plan. He found a technician working alone in a side room, running maintenance on a power distribution node. The technician was focused on his work, muttering to himself as he adjusted settings on a control panel. He never heard Cole approaching from behind. He never felt the precise pressure applied to certain points on his neck. He simply slumped forward, unconscious before his brain even registered what was happening. Cole caught the technician before he could fall and laid him gently on the floor. Then he took the technician's access card, pressed the unconscious hand against the biometric scanner, and walked into the secondary data core like he belonged there. The AI noted that Technician 7th class had entered the data core. This was normal, had authorization to be there. The AI saw no reason to raise an alert. Cole downloaded everything. Back in the command center was growing desperate. 15 guards were now unconscious. Reports were coming in from all over the fortress. Whatever was happening, it was spreading. His security teams were running in circles, chasing shadows that did not exist. "Show me all movement in the last hour," he ordered the AI. The display filled with data. Thousands of markers showing crew members moving through corridors, entering rooms, performing their duties. Scan the information, looking for patterns, looking for anything unusual. There was nothing, just normal activity, just his own people going about their business. But somewhere in that data, he knew, were the intruders. They were hidden in plain sight, moving through spaces that should have been secure, exploiting weaknesses that nobody had ever thought to check. They were making his perfect fortress look like a joke. He thought about the reports he had read about humans, small species, relatively weak, no natural weapons like claws or fangs. They had seemed unremarkable when they first appeared on the galactic stage, just another primitive race that had stumbled into space, nothing to worry about. He was beginning to realize how wrong those reports had been. The humans were not remarkable because of their strength. They were remarkable because of their minds, their patience, and their terrifying ability to adapt. They had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day, and they had survived by becoming something that no other species could match. They had become shadows. Part 3. Morning came to the unassailable crown, though in space, morning was just a number on a clock. The artificial lights cycled to their daytime settings, shifting from harsh white back to soft blue. The lockdown was still in effect. The patrols were still searching, but the urgency was fading, replaced by exhaustion and confusion. High Warden stood in the command center, studying the damage reports with all 4 of his eyes. 847 of his crew members had been rendered unconscious during the night. 847 soldiers, technicians, and officers, all put to sleep without a single death, without a single serious injury. Medical teams had revived most of them by now, but none of the victims could remember what had happened. One moment they were on duty. The next moment they were waking up on the floor. It was impossible. It was humiliating. It was absolutely terrifying. Approached the High Warden within his hands. His face was gray with fatigue and something else, something that looked very much like fear. "Sir," he said quietly, "we have completed the inventory. We know what was taken." Already knew it would be bad. He could see it in his second-in-command's eyes, but he asked anyway. "Report." All intelligence data regarding Operation Frontier, star charts, fleet positions, colonial timetables, diplomatic communications, everything. Paused, swallowing hard. The primary data core was accessed 12 times during the night. The secondary core was accessed 8 times. The backup archives were accessed 4 times. They took all of it, sir. Every copy we had. Felt the blood drain from his face. Operation Frontier was the hegemony's most ambitious expansion plan in centuries. They were preparing to colonize an entire sector of space, establishing military bases and mining operations that would double their resource production. It had taken years to plan, decades even. The information that had been stolen was worth more than the fortress itself. How did they access the data cores? He asked. Those rooms require biometric authorization. They used our own people, said. The security logs show authorized access by crew members who were later found unconscious. The intruders must have borrowed their credentials somehow, pressed their hands against the scanners while they were asleep. Closed his eyes for a moment. The humans had not just infiltrated his fortress. They had turned his own security systems against him. Every precaution, every safeguard, every layer of protection had been twisted into a tool for the enemy to use. "Is there anything else?" he asked, dreading the answer. Handed him the, "This was found on your personal terminal, sir, addressed to you." Looked at the screen. The message was written in perfect script, formal and precise. "The frontier is under the protection of the Terran Confederacy. We could have taken more than information. Remember that we chose not to. This courtesy will not be extended twice." Below the words was a signature, a human handprint pressed in some kind of ink that was slowly fading as he watched. By the time he finished reading, it was almost gone. He stared at the space where the handprint had been. A message from ghosts, a warning from shadows. On a small transport ship drifting in deep space, Commander sat with her team and reviewed the mission data. The unassailable crown was far behind them now, shrinking into the distance as they headed toward the rendezvous point. In a few hours, they would meet with a Terran Confederacy cruiser and transfer the stolen intelligence. In a few days, that intelligence would be analyzed by military strategists who would use it to plan the defense of the frontier. The mission had been a complete success. "Casualties?" asked, though she already knew the answer. "None," Specialist Cole replied, "on either side." She nodded. That had been important to her. They were not enemies in the traditional sense. They were rivals, competitors, potential threats, but they were not evil. They were just playing the same game that every species in the galaxy played, the game of expansion and resources and power. Humanity was playing it too. The difference was how humans chose to play. They relied on strength. They built massive fortresses and powerful weapons. They used overwhelming force to achieve their goals. It was a strategy that had worked for them for centuries. Humans were different. They were newcomers to the galaxy, a small species from a single planet, surrounded by empires that had been expanding for thousands of years. They could not compete through strength alone. They did not have the numbers or the resources, so they competed through other means. They competed through patience, through intelligence, through an ability to go places that no one else could go and do things that no one else could do. They competed by being shadows. The message left for High Warden had been carefully crafted to send a specific signal. The humans had shown that they could enter the most secure fortress in the hegemony and take whatever they wanted. They had also shown that they could do it without killing anyone. This was not an act of war. It was a demonstration, a warning. "Stay away from the frontier," the message said. "We are watching, we are everywhere, and you will never see us coming." Back on the unassailable crown, the High Council was already demanding answers. Would spend the next several months defending himself against accusations of incompetence. Investigations would be launched. Security protocols would be rewritten. New sensors would be installed, designed specifically to detect human infiltrators. It would not matter. The humans had studied them carefully before launching their mission. They knew how minds worked. They knew that they would respond to this breach by adding more sensors, more guards, more security layers. They would build higher walls and stronger doors. But they would never understand the fundamental truth that the humans had learned long ago. Security was not about walls and sensors. It was about psychology. It was about understanding how your enemy thought and exploiting the gaps in their assumptions. They assumed that all sapient species moved predictably. They assumed that security threats could be detected and measured. They assumed that with enough technology, any infiltration could be prevented. Humans made no such assumptions. Humans knew that there was always a way in. There was always a blind spot, a gap, a moment of weakness. The question was not whether you could find it. The question was whether you were patient enough to look. 6 months after the breach, the hegemony announced that Operation Frontier was being delayed indefinitely. The official reason was resource allocation concerns. The real reason was that their entire strategic plan had been compromised, and they had no idea what the humans were planning to do with the information. The Terran Confederacy said nothing. They did not need to. The message had been received. In the years that followed, the galaxy would learn to fear human infiltrators. Other species called them shadow walkers, ghost soldiers, demons in the dark. They became legends, stories told to frighten children and worry military commanders. Everyone knew that humans could appear anywhere, at any time, without warning. Everyone knew that human eyes were always watching from places you could not see. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. Humans were not supernatural. They were not ghosts or demons. They were just a species that had spent millions of years learning how to survive in a universe that wanted to kill them. They had learned their lessons well. Commander retired from active service 3 years after the unassailable crown operation. She spent her remaining years teaching new generations of infiltrators, passing on the skills and knowledge that she had accumulated over a lifetime of impossible missions. Her students would go on to become legends in their own right, shadows that moved through the galaxy, protecting humanity's interests without ever being seen. On her final day, one of her students asked her what made humans such effective infiltrators. What was the secret? What was the trick? Smiled, "There is no trick," she said. "There is only patience. We watch, we wait, we learn, and when the moment is right, we move. Other species think we are invisible, but we are not invisible. We are just very, very good at being still." She looked out the window at the stars, thinking about all the fortresses she had breached, all the secrets she had stolen, all the enemies she had outsmarted. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, full of species that were stronger, faster, and more advanced than humanity. But none of them could move like living shadows. None of them could become ghosts. And that, more than anything else, was why humanity would survive.